All right. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon to Aharon Pulver, who's speaking to us from Israel. I am delighted to welcome you to another Sunday morning interview with really fascinating people. And today we are going to be speaking about Har HaBayit, or in English, the Temple Mount. This is a topic that is perennial. It is an important issue for the Jewish people because the Temple Mount is the holiest site in Judaism, according to our tradition. And it is the one place in all of the land of Israel where it is not legal for a Jew to gather for religious services, ironically. There is also a tremendous amount of discussion that needs to be clarified as far as the halakhic permissibility of ascending the Temple Mount, but there's also the very real political issues of the importance of Jewish autonomy, if not sovereignty, over the Temple Mount. Many of you are aware of the politics that are involved in the Temple Mount today. Many of you are aware that it's currently controlled by the Waqf, which is a religious political entity controlled by Jordan. And that has been the case since the War of 1967. And it's something that is something that we wistfully talk about and openly discuss among ourselves. And now that there are more and more opportunities for Jews to go up to Har HaBayit, there's a tremendous amount of interest within our community as well. We also know that the Temple Mount was recently in the news during the most recent Gaza war against Hamas, because, and there's a lot of misinformation as far as the role of the Temple Mount in that entire skirmish. And we're going to ask Aharon to clarify that for us as well. We are privileged to hear from Aharon Pulver from Israel, who is a representative of the organization Beyadenu, in our hands. You'll hear more about what that word means and how it's relevant to Har HaBayit today. And the organization Beyadenu is dedicated to preserving Jewish rights to the Temple Mount. We are also privileged to have with us one of our own, if I may be so bold to take credit of one. When I say one of our own, a young man who grew up at the Bayit, who made Aliyah, Nati, or Alex Huberman, is with us today. He's actually on break from medical school in Israel, and he's home in Toronto just for a few weeks. And I asked Nati to join us because one of Nati's passions is Har HaBayit. He has been working with the organization Beyadenu. He has in the past and continues to do this on occasion whenever his schedule allows, to take tours and groups of people up to the Temple Mount to show them what's going on and to be able to give as many people the experience of Har HaBayit as he possibly can. And so with that, I'm going to ask Nati, or Alex, if you would be so kind, just please introduce our speaker today and introduce Beyadenu. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Welcome, everyone. I know that today will be very interesting to a lot. Some know a little bit, some know a lot more. But in any case, just to add to what you were saying, Rabbi, in addition to taking tours, I was also the project manager for Students for the Temple Mount, which is a sub-organization within Beyadenu. And I've been very involved in these organizations for the past number of years. The first time that I had gone up to the Temple Mount was about 10 years ago. And I've seen a lot of change, a lot of positive change on the Temple Mount since then. And a lot of that is due to it's really the mesirut nefesh of the volunteers and the organization Beyadenu that they've been involved in many projects to improve the experience for Jews and non-Jews on the Temple Mount, and that's really what this is about. And I'm sure we'll hear more about it. As you said, I've been a little bit caught up of the past year, and so I haven't been that involved as I used to be. But through Beyadenu and through my other channels, whether in Hebrew, Arabic, or English. I've kept up to date with what goes on the Temple Mount, and I believe that's extremely important, I think as we'll hear about. But before I just hand over the mic to Aharon, one of our best Peilim activists, I would just like to end with a drasha, an idea that was given by Rav Tzvi Kalisher, which I think summarizes a lot of what Beyadenu is about. Rav Tzvi Kalisher lived about 200 years ago. He was a student of the Chatam Sofer, and he wrote in his book, Ishat Zion, he gave a drasha on the pasuk that many of us probably are familiar with. And he took this as a kind of guidebook as to where we are to go with the Temple Mount. And he gives the drasha like this. He says, first, I will first just bring Jews to the Temple Mount. There will be a Jewish presence on the Temple Mount, and that's all. And at a later stage, I'll give them joy through prayer on the Temple Mount, which I believe is where we're at right now. We're at a transition point on the Temple Mount for Jewish prayer and for Jewish presence, which is what Beyadenu is working towards right now. And I've seen a lot of changes on the Temple Mount over the years through that. And then there will be a mizbeach and everything that's involved in that. And then the later stage, there will be this universal temple for all nations, where we'll be able to pray on the Temple Mount, which I hope happens speedily in our days. But in any case, I would love to hear now from Aharon about a little bit what's going on, about these processes that are happening right before our eyes on the Temple Mount. So thank you very much for the opportunity to introduce, and let's hear more about it.
Thank you,
Alex, and Yishar Koch for the drasha, and thank you, Rabbi Korotkin, for inviting me to address members of your congregation and your friends. I'm very honored to be here today. I, like many of you, was quite young at the time of the Six-Day War. It was my bar mitzvah year. I was growing up in the Bronx, and I was not yet 13. It was before my bar mitzvah. And I played hooky from school to listen to the news. I played hooky from school to listen to the news because I was well aware that something of unbelievable historical import was about to happen to the Jewish people through the war. And I remember listening, trembling, and crying, even as a young person, when I heard that Jerusalem was liberated. My father was the Yankee of his synagogue. He was one of the few people who spoke English as a mother tongue in his synagogue, and it fell upon his shoulders to go up to the pulpit on the Shabbat after the Six-Day War in order to raise funds for an emergency campaign that was being run probably in every synagogue throughout the world, probably in your synagogue in Toronto as well, to help with the war wounded in Israel and to create a special fund for war widows and to help the state of Israel recuperate. And I'll never forget his address. His address was based on the fact that we witnessed unbelievable miracles in the previous week. But the miracles that we witnessed were not something that happened in a vacuum. They were miracles that came out of a 3,500-year dedication to Judaism. They were miracles that came about after having arisen from the ashes of Auschwitz and fought for a country and won it. They were miracles that we could all understood, and at the time we accepted those miracles as absolutely natural and understandable. However, little did we know that on that same Shabbat, the Shabbat that my father was trying to raise funds for an emergency campaign, as were so many other Jews throughout the world, on the same Shabbat when many in Israel were mourning the almost 2,000 soldiers we lost in those 6 days, on that same Shabbat, Moshe Dayan went up to the Temple Mount and literally handed the keys back to the Jordanian Waqf. It's not surprising in a way when we analyze the fact that Moshe Dayan attributed greater holiness to the wheat fields of the Ganya than he did to the Temple Mount. That was his mindset. Not that he did something that was forgivable. It was quite unforgivable. But the historical perspective today of what we suffer, the degradation we suffer on the Temple Mount, the lack of Jewish sovereignty on the Temple Mount, the lack of Israeli sovereignty on the Temple Mount, all goes back to that Shabbat directly after the Six-Day War, when Moshe Dayan, of his own volition, without a government decision to do so, simply handed the keys to the Jordanian Waqf and said, you guys do this. We want no part of it. When he said we wanted no part of it, he was speaking purely for himself, because clearly the Jewish people certainly did want a part of it. In fact, the following days witnessed the greatest conflict ever between the military rabbinate and the chief and the minister of defense of Israel, when Rabbi Goren, of blessed memory, fought tooth and nail to have that horrible decision rescinded. Unfortunately, he did not succeed. And today we have a situation in which the Jordanian Waqf still controls the Temple Mount to this day. Now, I was speaking very briefly with Rabbi Korobkin about the issue of halakha on the Temple Mount and whether Jews can go up, can't go up. And I'm certainly not a halakhic expert. And I certainly cannot opine whether anybody should or could or would go up to the Temple Mount or not. What I can say is that for those Jews whose rabbis do allow them to go up to the Temple Mount, for those Jews for whom going up to the Temple Mount is perfectly okay, as long as they keep to certain geographic boundaries, the right to go up to the Temple Mount has to be natural and has to be guarded by the state of Israel as a national trust for the future. The Temple Mount is clearly...
May I jump in for just a moment, Aharon?
Sure.
Because, yeah, I mean, I would love, I want to give you as much time. I want to give you the bulk of the time. I just want to interject because you've mentioned as far as, the halakhic permissibility, and it's up to the individual rabbi. Back in 2012, I gave a two-part shiur on the permissibility of ascending the Temple Mount, Bizman Hazeh nowadays. And I pointed out that at that time, when I was giving the shiur, which is close to 10 years ago, the majority of 20th century poskim were not allowing ascent to the Temple Mount. Included among those 20th century poskim were the first chief rabbi of Israel, Rav Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, Rav Waldenberg, the Tzitz Eliezer, Dayan Weiss, and Rav Ovadia Yosef. And at that time, we went through the tshuva of Rav Ovadia. We also saw Rav Goren, who was very, very much an ardent supporter of allowing Jews, even from a halakhic standpoint, to ascend the Temple Mount. My understanding is that in the last 10 years or so, there have been more and more 21st century poskim who have made the argument for the permissibility of a Jew to ascend the Temple Mount, the Har HaBayit, provided that he or she goes through the proper purification requirements of ascending the Temple Mount, which is not something that should be so easily dismissed. But I would like to say that I would be humbled to follow in the footsteps of the policy of Rav Kook, which was that in Yeshivat Merkaz Harav throughout the 20th century, especially after the Six-Day War, they held to the psak of the founder, Rav Kook, Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, but at the same time sort of did not protest if members of the yeshiva took it upon themselves to decide for themselves that it was acceptable for them to ascend the Temple Mount. What I will do later is I will send out the link to our Kehillah for the shiur on Har HaBayit, but I just wanted to make that point just so that I could respond to what you just said. Please go ahead, Aharon. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Rabbi. There's, however, one thing I would dare to add to your comments about halakha, which is actually a non-halachic point about halakha. And that is that in the days when the great poskim gave an opinion about going up to the Temple Mount, the issues that face us today about the importance of going up to the Temple Mount, about the importance of Israeli sovereignty on the Temple Mount, did not exist in those days. Today, Baruch Hashem, we have a sovereign state. And we've seen during the last conflict that Hamas and the Islamic movement in general has put the Temple Mount firmly in the crosshairs of their fire. And within that framework, we need to have a new halakhic discussion. It was the British General Cunningham, who was a high commissioner in what was then the Mandate of Palestine, who said that whoever controls the Temple Mount controls Jerusalem, and whoever controls Jerusalem controls the land of Israel. And he was right in his assessment then, and that assessment is correct today. Understanding that, I think, means that we have to have a new halachic discussion that takes into account the parameters of national security and pikuach nefesh. And that was something that did not enter the discussion, even in the days of Rav Kook, zichrono livracha. So
thank you. You're 100% right that there are very new considerations today, and that's why this issue needs to be continuously reviewed by our poskim, and we need to remain current and abreast of what the new literature says. And I'm completely respectful of that, and that's why I gave that disclaimer. I wanted to ask, you touched upon this just a moment ago. For those who may not be aware, could you give us a brief rundown of what happened in the last few weeks with the war with Hamas and how the Temple Mount played a role in this? I mean, we've heard perhaps some jaundiced media clips of the saying that, there was a fire that was started in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and that there were yeshiva students at the Kotel who were cheering over the fire and promoting this and promoting violence on the Temple Mount. Give us a rundown of what actually happened,
please. We need to understand before I give you a rundown on what's happened in the past couple of weeks, since Yom Yerushalayim till now, we should understand that the issue of the Temple Mount, or what the Muslims refer to as Al-Aqsa, has been paramount in the conflict between Jews and Arabs in this country since the 1920s. The first mufti of Palestine, Haj Amin al-Husseini, invented the war slogan, Al-Aqsa is in danger, in 1924, in order to create riots in Jerusalem against Jews. It was during those riots, by the way, that Zev Jabotinsky founded the Haganah. This problem goes way back to then. It was a lie then. Al-Aqsa was not in danger then, nor is it in danger now. However, historically, the Arabs have used that battle cry whenever they want to have pogroms against the Jews, whenever they want to incite the mob to instant violence. And please, let's remember when we speak about instant violence that we live in the Middle East. Our neighbors are not the Finns, they're not the Swiss, they're not the Norwegians. An inflammatory address from the pulpit in mosques throughout Jerusalem can cause Jewish blood to run in the streets. These are our neighbors. These are the people we have to live with. And the cry of Al-Aqsa being in danger has been used for almost 100 years. Hamas very astutely understood that in order to create greater political gravitas in Yehuda v'Shomron, with elections appearing then to be on the horizon, they needed to use the battle cry. And they needed to position themselves as the Islamic protector of Al-Aqsa. And to a large extent, they succeeded in doing that. Within the Arab world today, within the Arab world, within pre-1967 Israel, within the Arab world in Judea and Samaria, within the Arab world throughout the Arab world, perhaps with the exception of the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia and the Sunni states, Hamas is considered now to be the protector of Jerusalem. And by doing what they did, by making outrageous demands of us in terms of how we behave in our capital city, they were able to put themselves on the agenda as the political interlocutor with Israel and a political force by firing missiles at Jerusalem. I was at the Kotel for Shacharit. I'm not at the Kotel now, as my wonderfully talented granddaughter who did this background for me. But I was at the Kotel for Shacharit on Yom Ha'atzmaut. And I could tell you that what happened at that time was certainly not any, there were no provocations by Jews. Jews were praying at the Kotel when the riots began. The riots were instigated by the Mufti on top of the Temple Mount, and they spread quickly throughout Yerushalayim and quickly throughout the entire country. The Al-Aqsa Mosque has never been disrespected by Jews. It's never been in danger. It's a complete fallacy. One must understand that the Temple Mount is itself over 140 dunam large. That's about 60 acres. It's a huge complex. Of that complex, most of it is open public space. Open public space. For those of you who have been up to the Temple Mount like I have been, and I have been many times, the Temple Mount is huge. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is a building on the southeastern corner of the Temple Mount, and Jews never attempt to enter it. Jews only respect it. It's the large open space that is denied what should be happening there, and that is Jewish prayer. There are 11 gates going up to the Temple Mount.
Sorry, if you
one is permissible to Jews. Jews are denied free access and are only allowed up for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon. 5 days a week and not 7. Jews are allowed up from Sunday through Thursday. Friday and Shabbat, Jews are not allowed on the Temple Mount at all. Jews are not allowed to pray on the Temple Mount. Jews are not allowed to dawdle on the Temple Mount. Jews have to walk quickly on the Temple Mount. Jews are not allowed to drink water on the Temple Mount. Jews are not allowed to mumble prayers on the Temple Mount. Jews are not allowed to hold an Israeli flag on the Temple Mount. Jews are not allowed to put on tefillin on the Temple Mount. Jews are not allowed to take a talit on the Temple Mount. Jews are not allowed to take a siddur on the Temple Mount. Jews are not allowed to say for Tehillim on the Temple Mount. Now, that's the situation today.
You know, that's very illuminating. How does a free democracy like Israel justify this kind of restriction of religious expression on the Temple Mount? How is that consistent with the rest of Israel?
It's completely inconsistent, Rabbi. In fact, the Israel Supreme Court has already opined that Jewish prayer must be allowed on the Temple Mount. However, the codicil to that opinion has been that Jewish prayer could be allowed on the Temple Mount only as long as the police can guarantee public order. And the police are not willing to guarantee public order. They're not willing to guarantee public order. And that in and of itself is a damning comment about Israel. Now, I can tell you from my American background that President Dwight Eisenhower, who was no great liberal, was called upon to integrate schools in the Deep South in 1959. And in that year, there were riots in Little Rock, Arkansas, which became quite well known. You may have heard about them and read about them in Canada as well. In order to integrate one public school in Little Rock, Arkansas, for 5 young African-American students, Dwight Eisenhower called out the National Guard and flooded Little Rock, Arkansas with 19,000 federal troops. And those kids were escorted to school by soldiers with bayonets on the tips of their rifles. He gave a clear statement to every white supremacist in the United States that a Supreme Court decision to integrate American schools was going to be carried out, even if he had to call out the troops. And the same thing should happen in Israel today. If our Supreme Court applies that I have the right to pray on the Temple Mount, then I don't care if the government of Israel has to call up every reservist we have. We should be allowed to pray on the Temple Mount.
But
And the fact that that doesn't happen is worrisome, because it sends the wrong message to our enemies, and it sends the wrong message to our friends. Many people say that one of the issues underlining the lack of Jewish rights on the Temple Mount is our peace agreements with the Jordanians. That is an absolute fallacy. All of you could read the full text of the Israel-Jordanian peace agreements online. All you have to do is Google it. You'll find it on the site of the Israeli Foreign Ministry. There is no direct mention of the Temple Mount. The only mention of Jordanian interests in Jerusalem is that the Jordanians will be, quote, given special consideration in overseeing freedom of religion for all within the holy city. That's all. And by the way, that paragraph of the peace agreement speaks more to the fact that my rights are abridged than Muslim rights, which are not abridged.
Right. So if I could just, going back to that very apt analogy, the difference between what happened at the times of desegregation and what's in the US and what's going on in Israel today, obviously, is that there was a far greater amount of sympathy for the policy of desegregation in the US, at least in certain parts of the US, than there is as far as the world view of what should happen on the Temple Mount. There seems to be a great amount of antipathy and even anti-Semitism towards Israel in general today. And therefore, perhaps one could argue that the reason why the Israeli government has sort of, even with acknowledging that this is anti-democratic to deny rights of prayer on the Temple Mount, has not contested the issue strongly, simply because it seeks to realize the greater good of keeping the peace within Israel and not exposing Israeli citizens to further riots and pogroms and potential harm to its citizens. What would you respond to that?
My response is that Hamas just gave us a good lesson. Israel, since 1967, has not allowed Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount. And nonetheless, every time they want to harm Jews, every time they want to riot and spill Jewish blood, they use the same excuse, the same tired war cries against the Jews in order to incite violence against us. They, in fact, taught us a lesson. And the lesson is that there's no amount of appeasement that can buy their favor. And nor should we seek, particularly on this issue, to appease anybody. The issue of Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount is as basic as a Jew breathing free air. And we shouldn't have to go through loops in order to be able to explain it to the world. In fact, I'm far more concerned about explaining it to our fellow Jews. I firmly believe that if the Jewish people make a firm decision that there will in fact be Jewish sovereignty on the Temple Mount, then with Hashem's help, that will happen. And one of the things that we strive to do in the organization that we created is to both bring the Mount to the people and the people to the Mount. In 2013, myself and friends created an organization in order to be able to coalesce all the different organizations that were working in a very uncoordinated manner in order to be able to address the issue of Jewish sovereignty on the Temple Mount from a professional, well thought out perspective, and to be able to address it through work together with legislators in Israel and together with opinion makers in Israel in order to be able to create positive change. In that vein, the first coordinator of the organization we founded, whose name is now Beyadenu, was Harav Yehuda Glek, who we all know was, there was an attempted assassination on Rabbi Yehuda. And that happened while he was the executive director of this organization in 2014. And that was 7 years ago. And despite the fact that blood has been spilled, we still have not seen any amelioration in the Jewish status on the Temple Mount today. We have worked diligently to create a Knesset lobby for the Temple Mount, and we have members of the Knesset lobby from different parties within the Knesset who agree that the issue of the Temple Mount is an issue that speaks to the very heart of Israeli sovereignty in the land of Israel. And some of the members of the Knesset lobby for the Temple Mount are not even religious, and frankly, give no religious import to the site. They give great historical and national import to the site. And even though they themselves may not be Shomrei Mitzvot, they understand that the Temple Mount is the center and the beating heart of the Jewish people. And without the Temple Mount, there is no state of Israel. Without the Temple Mount, there's only an attempt to create something that will bring ultimate geula.
You talk about you talk about the political lobbying that's going on today. Have you encountered a more receptive political audience with the rise of Naftali Bennett as a new prime minister?
I had a very frank discussion with Naftali Bennett several years ago about the issue of the Temple Mount. And I think that he thought that I was going to discuss the issue of korbanot with him when I walked in the door. And I clearly didn't. I'm not one who believes that we should be doing that or practicing that, although there are those who do. I spoke to him about the issue of civil rights. And I spoke to him about the issue of Little Rock, Arkansas, and what President Eisenhower did when it came to ensuring civil rights. And he looked at me and he said, I never thought about it like that. Interesting. I'll think about it. And unfortunately, from that time till now, we haven't had an opportunity to have a frank discussion. But I've spoken to other people in the government as well about the issue of the Temple Mount. And I think that slowly but surely people are coming around. And one of the reasons people are coming around is because, Baruch Hashem, we've been able to generate greater interest on the part of Israeli Jews to go up to the Temple Mount. Today, Baruch Hashem, we see that almost 4 times the number of Jews are going up to the Temple Mount as only 5 years ago. And that's as a result of our very strenuous efforts to ensure that every day when Jews are allowed to go up to the Temple Mount, they're allowed to go up. Every day we ensure that groups arrive at the Temple Mount in order to go up. And by the way, when the government declares or even hints that there might be a closure for Jews to go up to the Temple Mount, as they hinted this past Yom Yerushalayim, we were the ones who were able to call out all our political contacts in the Knesset and ensure that the government relented in their decision and in fact did allow aliyot on Yom Yerushalayim. So our lobbying efforts are primary. Our efforts to speak to the Israeli public are very important. And in doing all this, we need the help of friends and like-minded people from abroad as well. You could all be part of this. We need help in doing it. The issues that we're dealing with are issues of such unbelievable historical import that I almost tremble when I speak about them. And in order to be able to address these issues, I must say that we need financial help in order to be able to move forward. We need to create more tools. We've created videos and we've created printed materials, and we need to reach out to more and more people in order to bring the message to them that they can go up to the Temple Mount, that they should be waiting in line to go up to the Temple Mount. We constantly appeal to the Supreme Court to declare the anomalies that exist in Jews going up to the Temple Mount to be illegal. A good example of that is our recent Supreme Court case against the Israeli police for having a line for Jews who are predetermined and profiled to be Orthodox. When you wait to go up to the Temple Mount, if you stand on line A, you can stand on line A if you look non-Orthodox. If you have no kippah, if you have no kisui rosh, if you have 3 earrings in one ear and 4 in the other, you could easily stand on line A and go up with all the non-Jewish tourists, and you won't be accosted by the Israeli police. However, if you look like me, or like the rabbi, or like many of you that I see here on joining us on Zoom, you go on line B. And line B is for people who are profiled to be from. And frankly, if you go on line B, you'll be frisked. If you go on line B, you'll be given a rather lengthy lecture on what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do on the Temple Mount. If you go on line B, you'll have things taken away from you, like a Jewish star necklace, or a Sefer Tehillim, or an Israeli flag, or any sign that has anything to do with Judaism whatsoever. And then only then will you be allowed to go up to the Temple Mount, during which time you will be followed by representatives of the Jordanian Waqf, which are Jordanian religious police. So going back to what I said about Moshe Dayan giving the keys to the Jordanians, after only 19 years of illegal occupation of Yerushalayim, the Jordanians to this day are given a special status on the Temple Mount, and Jordanian religious police follow every religious Jew who goes up on the Temple Mount and point that religious Jew out if he's mumbling a prayer, so that the Israeli police will escort him off the mount.
So Aharon, if I could ask you, things are dynamically changing all the time. Israel has succeeded in the last few years in making peace treaties with a number of Arab states in the region, with the Abraham Accords. How has this affected the ability for us to move forward in negotiating with the Waqf on the Temple Mount to allow more rights for the Jews who want to be able to go up there for religious purposes?
We will never negotiate with the Waqf. The Waqf, according to Israeli law, has no official status on the Temple Mount. As I said before, the peace agreements between Israel and Jordan allow no special consideration for the Jordanians on the Temple Mount other than ensuring religious freedom for all. The Waqf is an organization that operates illegally in Yerushalayim with the verbal agreement of consecutive Israeli governments, which should never have been given. The only people we have to negotiate with in terms of Jewish rights on the Temple Mount are the Jews. Is the Israeli government that consistently avoids making the difficult decisions. They're not easy decisions, avoids making the difficult decisions about Jewish religious and civil rights on the Temple Mount. But the time has come for them to make them. Time has come. It's gone on for too long, and the degradation is too great. And by the way, the military ramifications, as we've seen during the last conflict with Hamas, are clear and in front of our eyes. We need to send a clear message to our enemies and our friends. The Jews control this country. The Jews control this land. That's not something that is in question. And by the way, I think that message, apropos to your question, Rabbi, resonates well in places like Dubai and the United Arab Emirates, and probably even in Saudi Arabia. I urge you all to listen to a fascinating lecture by Dr. Mordechai Kedar, which you can all find on the internet, on YouTube, about the actual history of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which was given great importance and called Al-Aqsa not by the people who controlled Mecca and Medina, but rather by an emir who controlled Damascus about 1,000 years ago, who wanted a counterweight to the two holy cities in Mecca, in the Arabian Peninsula, Mecca and Medina. And there are many Saudi clerics who feel that Al-Aqsa is actually in between Mecca and Medina and the Arabian Peninsula, nowhere near Yerushalayim. There are people in the Gulf who see that as being more correct than the situation today, where the majority of the Muslim world clearly doesn't have it right in terms of their own of what their own scriptures say. But having said that, the Abraham Accords do offer a unique opportunity because we are diffusing the so-called Palestinian narrative through the Abraham Accords. And by diffusing that narrative and inviting people from the Emirates and from Dubai, and even from Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan to come and visit the Temple Mount anytime they want and go to Al-Aqsa freely, then we diffuse the war cry that Al-Aqsa is in danger. Once people actually come and see it, and we've had instances of Egyptian bloggers and bloggers from Saudi Arabia and bloggers from the Emirates who've been to Yerushalayim and have been to Har HaBayit and have been to Al-Aqsa and have put out videos saying, Chevre, come and join us, come and pray Al-Aqsa. The Jews are only respecting the site. You can walk here freely. You can pray here freely. You have nothing to worry about. The cries that Al-Aqsa is in danger are lies. The more we can get that message out, I think the more we will encourage the Israeli government to adopt our position, that the time has come for free Jewish prayer.
If someone wants to learn more and get more involved with the organization Beyadenu, what's your website?
Well, our website is a great question, Rabbi. I don't remember it offhand, but everybody could write to me, and I'll be happy to send them the website and give them further information.
What is your email address? I'm just going to put it in the comments.
My email address is really easy. It's fund, F-U-N-D, 5708 at Gmail. Fund 5708 at gmail.com. I'll be happy to answer anybody's questions and conduct a conversation with anybody who's interested in helping with us. So one other thing I'd like to point out about what you raised, Rabbi, about the Emirates and Dubai and the Abraham Accords. One of the things we decided to do was to hire a coordinator, an executive director of Beyadenu who speaks fluent Arabic. And the reason we wanted a Jew who speaks fluent Arabic is because we wanted to speak to the Arab world in their own voice, in their own language, and tell them clearly that Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount does not endanger their right to prayer at all. In fact, we invite them to come and pray on the Temple Mount. The Jewish position, Beit Tfilatihi L'Kol Ha'amim, is still a position that we hold, despite the fact that we've had 100 years of conflict, and despite the fact that we've had 100 years of bloodshed. We are welcoming, and we welcome Arabs to come up to the Temple Mount. However, we don't welcome them to deny Jewish sovereignty, either on the Temple Mount or in Yerushalayim or anywhere else in Eretz Yisrael. We need your help, and we need the help of your congregation. We need financial support in order to be able to reach more and more Jews, in order to be able to reach out with more creative tools in Hebrew, in English, in Russian, in Arabic, in order to be able to speak to the entire world about the issue of the importance of the Temple Mount to the Jewish people and the natural way it should be on the Temple Mount. And the natural way is for the Jews to control their home. And I'd like to invite you all to take part with us in helping us, whatever you can do financially to help us to reach out to more and more people and to work in a more professional manner, to hire more professional lobbyists to work in the Knesset, to be in greater contact with government ministers and members of Knesset as we are today, would be greatly appreciated. We're working on fumes at the moment, and anything you do to help would be wonderful.
Thank you. Nati, if you can pull up the website. I'm not sure if you have it and just put it in the comment section so that people can see if they want to go directly to the Beyadenu website. I would like to take some questions from the floor. Unfortunately, I'm not looking at the Facebook, but I am looking at the chats and the Zoom. We have a question. Did Moshe Dayan ever explain the reason for handing the keys to the Jordanian Waqf?
Yes, he was quoted as saying that Israel doesn't need a Vatican, and that by holding a Vatican, we'd be only opening ourselves up to great violence.
Mhm. Okay.
Unfortunately, by by giving away what he defined as a Vatican, we've opened ourselves up to great violence.
Well, I mean, I get the analogy to a Vatican is quite interesting. It is somewhat offensive, I think, to us who look with great nostalgia and affection to the Makom HaMikdash, to the temple, to the place of our Beit HaMikdash, and look forward to the construction of the third temple. It's certainly a very grating analogy. Aharon, could you please explain the significance of the quote-unquote status quo and whether you feel it has relevance today? If you could explain that term, status quo, its relation to the Temple Mount, and then whether it's relevant or not today.
There is no status quo, Rabbi. There never has been a status quo. In the years following 1967, Jews were allowed up on the Temple Mount fairly freely. However, Jewish prayer was not allowed, and Jews were allowed up through more than one gate. What's happened is that because we allow the Waqf to run roughshod over the entire issue of Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount, the status quo has morphed on a yearly basis and become more and more limiting to Jews going up to the Temple Mount. In fact, the Waqf has used every excuse in the book in order to try to walk back Jewish rights on the Temple Mount. And to a great extent, they have succeeded. To a great extent, they have succeeded. While Jewish prayer was never allowed on the Temple Mount, from the time Arav Goren went up to the Temple Mount and blew shofar and circled what's called the Dome of the Rock with a Sefer Torah and Shvarot. Since that time, everything's been walked back. So no longer are we allowed up through 11 gates, but only one. No longer are we allowed up 7 days a week, only 5. No longer are we allowed up 24 hours a day. We're only allowed up 4 hours a day on the 5 days that we're allowed up. So what we've seen is that the status quo only changes to the detriment of the Jews. It's a phrase that's used by the Arabs to justify any of their demands. It doesn't exist. It never existed. There is no status quo.
All right, thank you. The website is templeheritage.com. Templeheritage, all one word, .com. You can learn more about the work that Aharon and his entire team at Beyadenu is involved with. And I'd like to thank you so much, Aharon, for providing us with some of this very important information. I think that one thing that's very powerful, at least to me, that you said, is that the Temple Mount, the objective of the Jewish people who are interested in the Temple Mount is not to take away. It's not a zero-sum game. That is, if the Jews have an opportunity to go up to Har HaBayit, the Arabs lose anything. They will still have their mosque. They will still have their holy place on the Temple Mount. All the Jews are asking for, all the Israelis who would like to be able to go up to the Temple Mount, is just to have equal rights as a citizen of the country, to be able to pray on the Temple Mount and express their religion freely. It doesn't seem to be such an outlandish kind of demand when you think about living in a free democracy. To be denied rights of prayer anywhere seems to be quite offensive to us who have democratic values and freedom of religion to express how we're going to pray. To be denied that right on the holiest site for the Jewish people is really quite outrageous. And therefore the request and the expectation to be able to have rights of prayer on the Temple Mount and to be able to ascend freely is quite logical, quite reasonable, and there's no religious extremism involved here. There's no reason why people should feel that this is incitement to violence in any way. So again, I want to thank you so much, Aharon. I want to thank what the people in Beyadenu are doing. This is a very important organization, and let's give it some more thought in the coming weeks and months as we get closer and closer to Eretz Yisrael and to our Bezrat Hashem, our redemption very soon. Let me wish you all Shavua Tov. Aharon, it's a pleasure to meet you. I look forward to seeing you again, Bezrat Hashem, next time in Israel.
Bezrat Hashem. Thank you, Rabbi. And I invite you all to be in touch with us. If you do come to Eretz Yisrael, be in touch with us, and we'd love to be able to take you up to the Temple Mount. Within the limitations, unfortunately, Bezrat Hashem, by the time you guys get here, there'll be no limitations and we'll be able to go up freely. But please feel free to be in contact with us, and we'll be happy to facilitate your aliyah, if your rabbi allows.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and a wonderful week. Kol Tov.
Thank you. Shavua Tov l'kulam.
Shavua Tov.